I'm Ernest King, born February the 19th, 1919, in Edmonton, Alberta. I am the fourth in a family of 5 children. Some of my earliest collections was being moved around northern Alberta quite a lot. We lived in Edmonton, Athabasca, Drumheller, Stettler, back to Edmonton. My mother and father were constantly bickering and quarreling and fighting, and so they decided they would split up, and my younger brother and I were taken to Breton, Alberta, where we were given to my dad's older brother. My dad took my other 2 sisters, my 2 sisters and my older brother, and took them to Banff. But that didn't last long. Pretty soon my mother was in Calgary at that time, and she decided she wanted to get her family back together. So next thing I know, we were all in Calgary. And that's where I really got started school. My dad and mother started a restaurant, of which my mother did most of the work, her and my older sister. So we were kind of used to eating well anyhow, even though family life wasn't all that pleasant. We had plenty to eat. But that went on until 1929, early in 29, when my mother and dad my mother said she'd had enough, and so the family split up again. My mother took us 5 kids and moved to Vancouver, and my dad stayed in Calgary. We came out here the same year, the same weekend that they had that huge stock market crash in 1929, which sent the whole practically the whole world into depression. So we arrived in Vancouver with very little money. We managed to get a house out in South Vancouver. We couldn't afford to keep it because rent was $35 a month, which was much too much for us. So my mother found a place for us to stay for $10 a month. Because of the situation, we wound up having to scuffle and get what we could. I remember a house next door to us had apples still growing on the tree when we first got to Vancouver. And I was quite surprised. I'd never seen fruit growing on trees before. Some was laying on the ground, so I remember me and my brother asking the people that lived there if we could have some of the apples that had fallen on the ground, and they said sure. So my mother took them and cut the bad parts off and made applesauce. And I remember our first night in that house, we had applesauce with bread. And that was our dinner. We'd come from a pretty good life in Calgary, food-wise. And here we arrive in Vancouver. There's nothing happening at all. No food stuff, and we were scuffling for this, picking wild blackberries, and we had to go on something called relief. At that time, you had to go down and take a gunny sack and go down and get some food from like a food bank. By that time, I was about 10 years old then. I remember the city of Vancouver give poor families, they loaned you a piece of land. You could plant a garden on there. We had one down near Trout Lake, and we planted potatoes. When they were ready, my brother and I would go down, we'd dig them up, we'd take the potatoes out and peddle them from house to house and pick up a few dollars that way. And this went on until I graduated out of from Alexandra School on the corner of Broadway and Clark Drive, yeah. And so I wanted to go to Tech, but the price of books was so much that we couldn't afford to buy books, so I had to quit school. When I got out of school, my first job I got was unloading trucks at a sawmill on False Creek. I was working with a friend of mine named D. We went down there. We got a job unloading these trucks, and we understood we were going to get paid $5 a week. At the end of the week came the guy came up and he gave us $3 a piece, and so we complained about it. He said, "Well, I don't want you no more anyhow," so he let us go. Well, then I heard about a Chinese guy that wanted a guy to go out in the Fraser Valley and pick fruit. So I went down and he said, okay. So he took me with him out somewhere out in the Fraser Valley. I'm not quite sure where it is. And we were driving along, and we went to make a left turn to go into the farm we were going to go pick the fruit at. Another car came up and hit us broadside. It was probably a pickup truck. Anyway, the guy, he weighed about over 200 pounds, a big fat guy. And he landed on me, and I wound up with a broken arm and a fractured shoulder blade. I didn't know anything about, somebody being liable or anything. So anyway, I just went on. They took me to the Royal Columbia Hospital in New Westminster and patched me up, put my arm in a cast, and I was too stupid or too ignorant to know that I had a lawsuit against these people, but I didn't pursue it because I didn't know anything. I didn't know any better. After my arm healed, I started looking for a job and doing odd jobs around. Finally, we moved to another neighborhood up near Vernon and Venables, and we was right across from this furniture factory called Hammond's Furniture. And so I remember seeing a crowd of guys standing around every morning out there, and I realized they were coming to see if they could get a job on there. So I started hanging out there myself. And I went every morning, 7 o'clock, and wait there for Mr. Hammond would come down and look the crowd of guys. He'd say, "Okay, I'll take you," or "I'll take you, I'll take you." It took me about 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, before he finally selected me and took me on in there, and I worked there for 4 years, from 1937, 38, 39, and 40. My starting salary was 20 cents an hour, and I think when I left there, I was getting 20. It got raised to 25, then 30, 35. I was getting 40 cents an hour when this time the war had broken out, and when I quit and went to join the army. Myself and a couple other guys, we went down and we signed up to. First of all, I tried to join the Navy. Well, that was out of the question. They wouldn't accept me into the Navy, Canadian Navy. So then we said, well, we'll try. We heard about them getting an outfit called the Rocky Mountain Rangers, and so we joined that. Went down to the Vancouver Hotel, the old Vancouver Hotel. And there we joined the Rocky Mountain Rangers and were sent up to Kamloops. All the names of all the guys that had joined were put on a blackboard in alphabetical order. And so I remember the 3 guys, colored guys, we sitting there and looking, and finally came down, going down the list, and they came to K, King. And they skipped that name and went on, left it on the board. It got down to Mortimer. And they skipped that. And I said, wow, there's something going on here. Then they got down to Wilson and skipped that. And that name was left in there. I said, hey, we're not going to get in this army at all. So sure enough, the guy came along. He said, well, you guys, we're not going to take you in the army because we don't think you'll be compatible with the other guy troops. So we're going to give you deferment payments and send you back to Vancouver. I was indignant. I thought this is the last straw. So I was really annoyed with it. But we came back to Vancouver, and I remember going back and asking for my job back at Hammond's. And Mr. Hammond, he liked me, so he says okay, you can have your job back. So I went back and I worked there for a period of time until things got so tough during the war that they were ready to take anybody. So Benny Wilson and me, we both decided we'd go back and enlist again. But Mortimer, he says, no, I'm not going to be bothered with him. He never did go back. So Benny joined the PPCLI, and I joined the RCA. And when I was sent up to Vernon, and the personnel officer asked me, I asked everybody, can you sing, dance, or play an instrument? Well, at that time I was playing the trombone and reasonably well. And I told him, yes, I play the trombone. He said, well, we haven't got any trombone players in camp, so you're going to play in the band. So I said, this is great, because now I'm going to get a chance to play with other musicians, and I'm going to get a chance to improve on my reading ability and practice my horn. And was sent to Vernon, where I played in the band there for a long time, and I then was sent to other camps for advanced training, where I was bugler and playing in bands there too. That went on. I stayed in the band until the war ended. I'm out of the army now, and I went down and I got a job with the BC Hardwood Floor Company. And the foreman there, I guess he thought I was being hired as a laborer, but I was being hired as a woodworking machinist. Anyway, the people that owned the company the superintendent came out and says, why you got this guy out here piling lumber? He says, he's a woodworking machinist. So the foreman, he comes over and he says, have you ever worked on woodworking machines before? I says, yeah, you show me anything here that I can't operate, and he didn't have anything in there I couldn't operate, because I'd worked on all these machines for the 4 years I'd worked in Hammond's. So when he convinced himself that I wasn't going to cut my hands off, he put me in charge of a whole department. I reorganized the department, and he put 4 guys working with me. And I was actually the straw boss there, and they had to do that. I ran the cut-off saw, and I put one on the jointer and another one on the rip saw, and then this girl and another guy running the sander, and the girl tailing the sander. So I stayed there for about 9 months. Then my brother and I decided, he says, let's just buy a truck and go into business. My younger brother, he'd been working on the CNR. He quit, or he got fired or something, because he was doing a lot of drinking back there. This is 45. And so we went in together and we bought this truck, and we went into the transfer business. And we started moving furniture and stuff for people. Then in 1946, my cousin Virgil Lane, he found an angel, a guy named Stoney Jackson, who put up a lot of money. He also played piano in the band, this guy. He thought Virgil had a potential of running a big band, which Virgil, he was a pretty good drummer, but he wasn't no band leader. So he rented a bus and sent the band was going to go on tour. He organized this band. I think there was 5 saxophones and 4 brass and 3 or 4 rhythm. And he was a featured drummer, but he had another drum that would play, and he would strut around looking important. He started on a tour across Western Canada. I was really having a ball. It was fun touring with that big band. And I was single, didn't have any dependents. Virgil wasn't a very good manager, so the band went broke. And so we made it as far as over to the prairies. We were backtracking there, playing Lethbridge, playing Edmonton, playing here and playing there. But the band got stranded in Calgary, and the guys started coming back to Vancouver. The bus left, and so the guys started getting back to Vancouver the best way they could. So I'd saved a little bit of money, and I returned to Vancouver and resumed the trucking business with my brother. 1947, I said, well, I'm going to organize my own band. So I organized an 8-piece combo. It wasn't a very good one either. It included my brother, and who played piano. Frank Risby played saxophone. Willie Hayes played trumpet. I organized the tour because I took advantage of the experience I had touring with Virgil's band. I said I didn't make the mistakes that he made, and it was a successful tour. So we went out, and we were gone. We played every night, 6 nights a week. And when the tour was finished, we came back, and every guy in the band had money, and I'd made myself somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000, I guess. I stashed it away because I knew I intended to go out again in 1948. Meanwhile, I figured I better get a job, so I wouldn't have to just be living off of what I'd made. My brother, he was really drinking and really carrying on bad. He started getting worse and worse and worse. We had this house together, so I said, well, I'm gonna move out of the house. I said, you can have it. And so we sold the truck, and I moved out of the house. Me and a couple other guys, we decided we heard about it. They were hiring people over in Yubo, over in Vancouver Island somewhere. So we went to Vancouver Island and went down. Sure enough, they gave us a job in Yubo. But we stayed there about a couple of months, I guess. And then we got laid off. One of the guys, he wound up in the hospital there with a broken arm. And me and the other guy came on back to Vancouver. And then we went looking for a job in Vancouver. I found a job in the foundry, the West Coast Foundry, I think it was. I forget the name of it, but I found a job there, and I got the guy there, the furnace man. He taught me how to pour steel and stuff like that. So that was a pretty good job. I wasn't scared of the steel. 48, I heard about this here. There was an outfit, I think they were called the Canadian Art Production. They'd heard something about my band, and they said, well, we'll give you, we'll send you on a 3-month tour across Canada. But we want an all-colored band. So I said, well, I think I can handle that. So I went down to Seattle, and I picked up on 4 guys there. These are some great musicians, too. It was alto player, piano player, bass, and tenor man. Well, the tenor man actually rounded the other guys up for me. The tenor man's name was Noble Perkins. I bought a bus, a 10-passenger bus, used, of course, and some uniforms. We got this band. It was a real good band. Those guys could really play. So we started out playing our way across BC, heading east. We were going to go all the way back to Toronto, and then come circle around. We were going to be gone about 3 months. That's what we thought. We got as far as Kamloops, and the road manager, when he says, "Hey, Ernie," he says, "you know one thing? The whole of Western Canada is underwater. So up in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and southern BC. And I mean, all of the Fraser Valley was underwater. I don't know where all this water comes from. But our road manager come and he says, "Ernie, we got to get out of here. We got to get back to Vancouver, or we're going to get caught up here and stranded here." So I agreed with him. So we beat it back to Vancouver, where to see if we could wait out the flood. But it stuck around. And finally, all the guys, they had to go. They couldn't sit around Vancouver. So 3 of the guys from the Seattle area, they went back to Seattle. Virgil and Willie, somehow got to Edmonton. I don't know how they did. I kind of came down with the flu and probably broken hearted too, because I lost all my money in that. And as far as the bus is concerned, I never did see it again. I don't know what happened to it. It's very strange. I paid down on that bus. I never did finish paying for it. I never even thought about the bus no more. My next recollection was that receiving a call from Edmonton saying, "If you guys can get here," and he says, "we can use you." And Noble Perkins says, "We can use you guys," and we're starting up another band. Anyway, we got up there. We talked our way onto a train, the first train coming out of it, leaving Vancouver in over 30 days of that flood. We told them we were stranded railroad porters out of Winnipeg, and we had to get back to Winnipeg some way. So the conductor led us on, and he took us as far as Edmonton, where we got off and joined this group. And he had some of the guys from the old band, Virgil and Willie, and a couple of guys that were already in Edmonton. Ernie King, he's my cousin, and he played piano. Will Harper played guitar and bass, and a guy named Jerry Bates, who was also an alto player. So we got there, and sure enough, Dave got organized, and he got another guy that put some money into the band, and we started out on the road again. And that's when we got as far as Lethbridge. The guy that had the bus, that put up the money for the bus, he took the bus and beat it. And now here we are with no transportation. I guess he thought he was going to make hundreds of dollars, but things didn't go the way he wanted them. We didn't have an advance man anyhow, so that was what was really wrong. Somebody to go out and do advance publicity or whatever was necessary. So the band broke up in Lethbridge. We wound up stranded. Oh, by the way, Will Harper's wife, Myrtle, my future wife, we were pretty good friends. So when they knew the band was in Lethbridge and they were in Edmonton, they decided they'd come down and surprise us. So sure enough, they did. I said, "Since you're going to be following me around, we may as well get married." So we did. We went and I married her in Lethbridge. But the band was on its last leg. It disbanded and scattered all over the place. And so my wife and I, we moved to Calgary, and we stayed there until around Christmas time. And she went up to the farm with her dad to spend the holidays with her family. And I stayed in Calgary because I had a job there, and I was working for another furniture factory. And but then the temperature went down to 10 below zero, and I says, "Oh hell, I can't handle this." So I quit and came back to Vancouver. But I phoned my wife first, and I says, "Don't come back to Calgary, because I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be in Vancouver, and I can't handle this cold weather." So that was the end of my Alberta adventure. In 1949, I went down and I got my job back in the foundry. While I was in Edmonton, I had learned something about the dry cleaning business. And because my cousin Vern had a shoe shine stand in the back of this cleaning place, cleaning and dry cleaning and press while you wait. So I used to watch this guy pressing while you wait. And so I said, "Geez, I'll start a joint like that." So I made a little money gambling, so I bought this here pressing machine. I opened this cleaning and pressing place on Gore Avenue and opened a gambling joint in the back. And so I was doing fine, or I thought I was doing fine. But obviously I had some enemies somewhere, because next thing I know, one day I was gambling in there one evening, and the cops came in. In other words, they busted me. And they took the money I had in front of me, and they really didn't have the right to do it. But I found all this out later. And they didn't take anybody else's money, just mine. And so that was the end of the gambling joint. So I sold the cleaners, and then I decided, well, I'm going to. Oh yeah, by the way, that's just about the same time my son was born. Then in 1950. This is 1950. Yeah, Raymond was born in 1950. So now I got this storefront, and so I said, my wife said, well, we got a chance to get this suite over on Georgia Street. So we moved out of the storefront and moved over to Georgia Street. So I said, well, I can go down and get a job on the CNR as a railroad porter until I can get my truck out. I'd made a down payment on a truck, and I didn't have the money to get it out. So I needed a couple $100, I think, more before I could get the truck out. So the CNR were hiring railroad porters there. So they sent me to Winnipeg to take a student's course. So I was down there 2 weeks taking this student's course. And then I'm keeping track of how many hours I had there and how much money that I had made so far, because they had to pay you for going to school there, taking the porter's course. So I said, by the time I get back to Vancouver, I'm going to have about $200. And then I don't need this job no more. I had never had any intention of becoming a railroad porter. They sent me out on a trip from Winnipeg to Vancouver. Well, I'd heard about there being an opportunity for there was a guy, an old fellow named Goldie Gill, and he was a standby man. And very seldom did he ever have to go out of town. He used to be an active porter, but he was too old now. But they didn't know. I don't think they knew how old he was. He was probably closer to 80 than he was to 60. And but he'd go down and stand by, and it was his job. In case some guy didn't show up, then he had to go out in their place. So I said, well, that would suit me fine. They found out how old he was, and they superannuated him. So they didn't have a standby man. So I'm operating out of Winnipeg, and I wanted to operate out of Vancouver. So I went down and I asked for the job. I said, can I get the job that Goldie had? Nobody wants it, but I want it. And so they said, oh, no, you can't just come in and tell us what you want. I said, well, I'm asking. I'm not telling you. I'm asking you. Nobody wants the job. I want it. It's food fit for me just right, and I will do the job. It didn't pay much. I think it only paid about $100 a month. But I says, I can do that. I can drive my truck in the daytime. So they wouldn't let me have it. So I said, well, okay, then I'll just quit. So you owe me $200. And so I took the $200, got my truck out, and and so that was the end of that. That was my last attempt to drive to work for the CNR. And so now I started buying and selling scrap iron. So I used to go with Bobby Jemerson. We'd go out to the Fraser Valley and go around the different farms, back roads, and see if we could buy any scrap iron. So one day we went out there and picked up a load. On our way back, the truck threw a rod. That's right. I had a load of scrap iron on. We'd spent all of our money, and we were not far from a place called Maple Ridge. That's about 30 or 40 miles out in the valley. And now we got no way of getting back to Vancouver, no money, nothing. So we somehow talked our way into a place. This was a place in Maple Ridge. Had a service station, and the guy that owned it was a retired RCMP cop. And he says, well, I'll send my son down to tow you in. He had a dump truck. So sure enough, his son came down. We hooked on with a big chain, and he towed us up to the garage. And now he says, well, I guess you guys would like something to eat. So sure enough, he gave us some supper. I said, well, we haven't got any money. I said, we won't have any money till we can sell this load. So he says, that's okay. He says, I guess you haven't got a place to sleep. So he says, no. So he says, I got a trailer out in the back. You guys can sleep in there for the night. So this is a total stranger. This guy never seen us before at all. So I thought, Jesus, this is great. People do this for us total strangers. So he fed us. Next morning, he got up and he gave us some breakfast, because he had this diner as well as a gas station. His son pulled the pan off of my truck, And he says, yeah, you've thrown a rod. He says, you can't go anywhere with this. So I said, well, I can go into Vancouver and get this other truck and tow this one back to Vancouver. Now, can you imagine me dragging a loaded truck all the way back to Vancouver with a chain? And this is a fact. Bobby steered my truck, and I got aboard this truck from this person I knew and towed my truck all the way back to Vancouver. Took it down the junkyard. They unloaded it. They paid me for the load. Oh, by the way, this guy had loaned us enough money to catch a bus and get back to Vancouver so we could get this operation going. And so I told him, I said, when I get the money, I'm going to come out here and I'm going to pay you. So sure enough, when I got my truck fixed, I came by there, and first thing I came in and I paid him, and he says, well, I never expected to see you again. I said, I'm not that kind of guy. So I paid him, and I said, every time I'm not going to gas up when I go out until I get here, and I'll fill up with gas, have a meal here, and I'll tell all the truckers I know to do the same. I says, because very seldom you find anybody that'll be that fair and square with you. That's exactly what we did. While we were having breakfast, he told me about a place just out of Headley called the Headley Mascot Gold Mine. And he says, there's all kinds of scrap iron up there. He said, he used to be a RCMP up there. And he said, that's why he knew that there was. He says, why don't you see if you can get that stuff? So I found out who owned it, the mine. It was a guy here in Vancouver named Mr. Gunn. He had an office on Granville and Hastings, upstairs on about the 10th or 12th floor or something like that. His name was Gunn. So I went up to see him, and I asked him, did he want to sell the scrap iron? So he said, well, what did he pay for it? So I remember, I figured, well, I think steel was selling about $18 a ton then. And I said, well, I can pay you $4 a ton because I got to load it and bring it back to Vancouver. So he says, no. He says, I've been offered more than that. So I said, but I've been up there and checked this out, and he had a lot of scrap iron up at that mine. But he also had a lot of machinery sitting around, and still in crates, new stuff. Huge motors, like 150 horsepower motors, 200 horsepower motors, stuff like that. So I says, what are you going to do with all that equipment? So he says, well, I'm going to take it to he owns some more mines over in the Kootenays. I'll either ship it over there or else I'll sell it. I said, well, what if I sell it for you? I said, could I get a commission? So he said, sure, I'll give you 5% if you sell it, get me what I want for it. So I went there, started scouting around, I found a place that was interested in it, and they sent a man up there, and I don't know what he offered them, but it wasn't enough. Mr. Gunn wouldn't take it. So he says, I'll just keep it and send it over to my other mines over in the Kootenays. But then he called me, and he says, that's scrap iron. He says, I'm going to give it to you, you can have it. He says, the fact that you tried to sell this stuff, and it's not your fault that they didn't buy it. He said, but he said, I can't afford to let them have it for the price that they wanted to pay me. He said, but I'm going to give you that scrap iron. He says, you can go ahead and just take it. And I'll phone. He had a caretaker up. He said, I'll notify him that you're coming up there. So sure enough, I took my brother and my uncle, and we went up there, and we stayed. There was nobody just this old caretaker there. And we stayed there about a couple of months, moving all that scrap iron. We loaded 2 gondolas, over 100 ton of scrap iron, and loaded into these gondolas and sent it back to Vancouver. And meanwhile, I was selling, I would take a few loads in to get operating capital. I could sell it in Princeton, up at the Princeton mine. That was about 20 miles away, I guess. I'd take it up to the mine there and sell it so we'd have operating capital. And then I sold a lot of pipe to the Penticton, some orchard guy had an orchard there. Penticton Pipe and Orchard Supply. And he bought all the loose pipe that I had. So I did very well with that. One day I'm going out by myself on the truck, and going down North Road out near the Lougheed Mall, a couple of blocks from there. And I seen a huge pile of car bodies sitting there. So I went in and I asked the guy who owns that. The guy named Ted was running this place. It's an auto wreckers. So he says, he says, what are you going to do with all those car bodies? He said, nothing. He says, if you want them, you can have them. So I said, well, wow, sure, I'll take them. I said, but I don't know how I'm going to load them. He said, I'll load them for you. So he had a crane rigged up in the trees. He would hook onto a car body, with a block and tackle and lift it up in the air, and I'd back my truck under and he'd lower it down. I could haul about 4 car bodies at a time. I worked there for 3 or 4 weeks. I was hauling in about 2 or 3 loads a day. And at $10 a ton, I would probably be getting $30 or $40 a load. But I was making about $100 a day. So this was great. So I got rid of all of his car bodies. Then he asked me, well, what about the steel? I said, yeah, I'll take steel. He said, well, I'll give you 50% of all the steel you sell. So we loaded up front ends, axles, rear ends, springs, and wheels, and all stuff like that. And I'd bring that in. Well, then I'd get maybe a couple $100 for the load. I'd give Ted half, and I took half. And then we got down to the motors, engine blocks. Well, they were made of cast iron. They were worth more. They were worth about $40 a ton, I think. So I said, well, I'll take a third of that and give you 2/3. And so he says, okay. I said, now all the metals I get out of these, like the bearings and the bushings, were made of brass. I said, I keep those for myself. And so he said, fine, that's fine. So he was happy with that. Then he decided he had a bunch of old radiators laying around there and batteries. So I took that in, and I got 25% of that when I got there. So it took me about 3 months to clean him all the stuff out of there. But by that time, I think Ted he'd made enough money. He left. And so now the guy that owns the place was Jack Mathers. And Jack didn't have anybody to run the place. So he asked me, would I run it? And I said, well, I'm not going to work for you. I says, I'll tell you what, you give me a interest, and I'll run the place. So he says, okay, 60-40. So I said, okay, you got a deal. So I said, but I'm going to buy and sell junk here too, as well as junk cars. Now, Jack had something like Buster's Towing. He did all the towing from around Westminster and that whole area. Jack, he called himself J&J Motors. J&M Motors or J&J Motors or something. Anyway, he had a couple of tow trucks, and he'd tow cars down that had been seized by the city, by the New Westminster police. And he'd bring them down, and then we'd wreck them and sell parts and take their junk and get rid of the junk. And also, I hired a guy named Derek, and he would stay there while I'm out there driving. Jack Mathers, that owned the place to start with, he sold me a building lot just about 2 blocks away, and I wanted to build a house. I said, well, I'm going to be working out here. I may as well be living out here. So I bought this lot off him for $500, and I managed to get a guy to come over and with a bulldozer, clear it, dig out a foundation, and then my wife and I we used to go out there on the weekend, and we'd try to build a foundation. Now, I'd never built a house in my life, but with the help of people around and the people that I knew, they came by and they told me, made sure that the foundations were right. They squared it all up for me and made the forms and everything. And then I actually literally mixed and poured the cement myself for the foundation. Then the bottom dropped out of the junk business. So you couldn't even give 10 away anymore. Car bodies, nobody would take them. And the steel price had dropped down about in half, so that seemed to be the finish of everything. So now I couldn't pay for this lot. I think I still owed $175 on this lot, and I couldn't finish building it. So what I did is Jack, he wanted to close the place down anyhow, and so I says, I'll take what interest I got here out in springs and axles and wheels and tires and tubes and stuff like that. So I took a few loads, and I rented a place up on Main Street in Vancouver. And I started this welding shop. And I had to teach myself to weld, because I never welded in my life. But I bought a welding machine, and I started teaching myself how to weld. And that's what I did. I actually literally taught myself how to weld. And then I started building trailers and call myself Tow Right Trailer Company. And then I had it figured out that I would build a bunch of trailers and rent them out, like U-Haul trailers. But U-Haul bought me out, and so I had about 25 trailers. I wanted to have about 100 trailers stationed, parked around here at service stations, etc. But when I got to I was going to lose the place anyhow, because another outfit had bought the store in front, and I had the place in the back, and they told me I had to move. So I sold out to U-Haul. I took that money and I bought a big moving van and a small moving van. I got jobs playing in various clubs. One of the first clubs I got to work in was a place up on Broadway in Fur called the Dog House. And it was quite accidental that I got that job, but I happened to went in there to get a coffee or something. I was talking to the lady, her husband owned the place. And I said, so do you ever use a band in here? And she said, oh, we occasionally do. We have quite a few banquets. So she said, have you got a band? I said, yeah, I got a band. So she said, well, we got a job coming up this Saturday. We don't have a band for it. Do you want to bring your band in? So I said, sure. So it was I had a three-piece band, piano, drums, and myself. And I would do vocals too. And so I was young then, I could handle that. And so we played that gig, and they liked it. The people liked the band, and so did the owner. So he says, okay, you can, I'll give you some more gigs here. So I started playing there off and on for, I forget what period of time. One night we went to play there, and there was a banquet going on. And when they got through eating, now we were supposed to be there at 9 o'clock, so we were there at 9 o'clock. And he says, well, they're not ready for you yet. He says, they're making speeches and stuff. So he says, you guys can go and sit out in the front and have a coffee, or come back in an hour if you like. So we went across the bridge and we went in someplace and we had a beer. We came back, and they still weren't ready for us. We sat around for a while, and then finally he says, okay, you go and play. So we went in there, and when the gig was over, this guy says, well, you guys were off for an hour and a half. I'm going to have to take an hour and a half pay off each one of you. I said, what do you mean? You can't do that. Oh, yes, I can, and that's what I'm going to do. So I said, well, you take the job and stuff it. He took a buck and a half off each one of us. And I says, as far as and I was a leader, I was supposed to get double, so he owed me about $6 or something. I says, you're going to pay me that money or else I ain't working here no more. So he says, I don't care. So away we went. Now this guy, he actually lost 2 banquets because the band I wasn't playing there. The people that they said, we want the same band you had when you were here before. And I wasn't available. He lost 2 $500 banquets. So I remember when his assistant manager, he was a pretty good guy, and he says, I remember he phoned me up and he says, what's the trouble between you and Leon? I says, I got no trouble with the guy. I says, I don't want to see him no more. The guy agreed to pay me the money that he owed me and not give me back the job. Well, then I worked there for a while. Then I started working I worked at the Forbidden City, worked at the Mandarin Gardens, the Mailing, and finally the New Delhi. This is 1956 at this time, working at the New Delhi. So the band's unionized by now. We're back in the union again. And so this guy, the guy that owned the New Delhi, was named Leo, he didn't want to pay us union scale. So he says, if you want to work for non-union scale, then he says, you can keep the job. But meanwhile, we were packing them in at the New Delhi. The place was packed every night. And most of the people that patronized him were black people. So I says, no, I can't work non-union. So he said, well, I've got a non-union band. I'll let you guys go. So now I got a hell of a band here. I got a guy named Lionel Mitchell playing tenor, who was fantastic. My piano player was Bobby Froge. He was fantastic. A guy named Bob Miller on the bass. He was fantastic. Chuck Logan and Ken Jacobs and myself were all black guys. And so Ken Jacobs played piano and Chuck Logan played the drums. And I had this terrific band. I said, man, that's a good band. I haven't got no place to play. So about that time, that's when this girl, Angie, came. She says, I don't know how the hell I bumped into her. Anyway, she says, well, I know a guy that's got a club that he needs a band. So she took me over to this place. It was called the El Trovatore, which eventually became the Harlem Nocturne. So she told me about this guy. I went in. I met the guy the next day. And we were sitting there, and next thing I know, this guy's showing me, here's the kitchen, and here's the washrooms, and here's this. Well, I said, I don't want to, I'm thinking, I don't want to hear this stuff. I'm come here to ask for a job, I says, well, where's your bandstand? He said, I don't have a bandstand. I said, well, where's the band going to play? He said, that what band? So it finally dawned on me, this guy's trying to sell me the joint. So I said, geez, that may not be such a bad idea. So I talked to the old lady about it. She says, well, if you want to. So I said, yeah, please, why not? I said, I'm tired of moving around from club to club, getting fired here and getting fired there. And so she says, okay, we'll take a crack at it. So that's how we got to Harlem. All the inspectors coming down and gonna, no, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're gonna do this, you're gonna do that. Until when I told them, I said, well, the hell with it, I won't bother, I'll just forget it. Well, then they changed their mind, and they decided, okay, we'll let him have his license, and that's how I really got into the Harlem Nocturne. Interested in making sure that the presentation of the existence of the Harlem Nocturne and the Harlem Nocturne Basketball Club and all the things that were connected with it were put in their proper perspective. The year I sold the Harlem Nocturne to Harry Walker, and Dave Clark. They operated the club until 1966, but kept getting further and further behind in their payments to me. I was very reluctant to repossess the club, but I had no alternative. Walker and Clark were fighting over the premises, but not paying. Clark suggested to me that if he could get sole possession, he would pay off the balance himself, as he could no longer trust his partner, Walker. Walker became suspicious, I guess, and he placed a padlock on the front door and refused to surrender the keys to anyone. I had the bailiff from Thompson and Bennington call up Harry Walker with an ultimatum, rather, and gave him 1 hour to remove the padlock from the door, and the bluff worked. He removed the padlock and surrendered the premises, the door keys, and I reluctantly reclaimed the club. I was already operating a very successful trucking business, Maple Leaf Disposals and Demolition Limited, and so I couldn't operate the club myself, so I hired a guy named Percy Byard, made an agreement with him. He would manage the club as a junior partner, with instructions to pay all the bills and account to me every week. And if he asked for any money from me, I would close it down forever. He also had instructions to see if he could find a buyer for the club and sell it. Well, when I made him the junior partner, he found a buyer quickly, and in 1968, the club changed hands, the chattel and everything were turned over to Jerry Wong. I was firmly and successfully established as owner and operator of Maple Leaf Demolition and Disposals Limited, and I had absolutely no intention of ever going back into the nightclub business. The guys bought me out in Coquitlam. I sold out the disposal business in 1986, and I kept operating the demolition company until 1990, and at that time I decided it was time for me to throw in the towel. I was kind of tired of all the hubbub. I was having labor problems. I'd give them a raise and they wouldn't be happy, and so finally I just said, I'm just going to close everything down. And so that was in 1990. I decided to retire permanently, and I've since contented myself with just performing music and doing stage plays, theater, and TV work, and just no more headaches with hiring a bunch of people.